3 million fans. One rejection. And a league that just got sent into full-blown panic mode. Let that sink in for a second. Caitlin Clark, the woman who broke every NCAA scoring record, who made women's basketball must-watch TV, who pulled in ratings that hadn't been seen since the days of Lisa Leslie and Cheryl Swoops, just said no to the WNBA. And not just any no. We're talking about a rejection so loud, so bold, and so unexpected that it crashed social media, sparked debates on every sports network, and left league executives scrambling for answers. But here's the real question: why? Why would the biggest name in women's basketball walk away from the very league that's supposed to be her destiny? Was it money? Was it disrespect? Or was it something much deeper, something that exposes the ugly underbelly of a league that claims to celebrate its stars but has a history of failing them? And then there are the fans. 3 million of them. Not just casual viewers, but passionate, angry, and vocal fans who took to Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram to voice their outrage. They didn't just criticize the league, they tore it apart. They called for boycotts. They demanded resignations. They turned this into more than just a sports story, they turned it into a movement. Because here's the thing, Caitlin Clark isn't just any player. She's the player. The one who brought unprecedented eyes to women's basketball. The one who filled arenas. The one who made little girls believe they could be the next big thing. And when you reject someone like that, or when someone like that rejects you, it's not just news. It's a statement. Today, we're going to break this down piece by piece. We're going to tell you exactly what happened, why it matters, and what this means for the future of the WNBA. This is not just a story about basketball, it's about power, money, ego, and a fan base that refused to stay silent. Buckle up, because this is about to get real. It was supposed to be a celebration. The WNBA had planned a grand invitation, a ceremonial offer to the most anticipated rookie in women's basketball history. They had cameras ready. They had press releases drafted. They had social media posts scheduled for maximum impact. This was going to be the moment the league announced its new era, the Caitlin Clark era. Except Caitlin Clark had other plans. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, while the league was gearing up for its biggest PR push of the year, Clark's representatives dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through every corner of the basketball world. The response was simple, direct, and devastating: she's not coming. Not yet. Not like this. And maybe, just maybe, not ever. Now, before we dive into the chaos that followed, let's rewind and understand exactly what was at stake here. The WNBA has been around since 1996. That's almost 3 decades of women's professional basketball. And for most of that time, the league has struggled with something very simple: visibility. You see, the WNBA has always had talent. Elite talent. Generational talent. But what it hasn't always had is attention. It hasn't had massive TV deals. It hasn't had sold-out arenas on a regular basis. It hasn't had the kind of cultural relevance that makes people who don't even watch basketball suddenly care about women's sports. That all changed with Caitlin Clark. Here's a stat that'll blow your mind. During Clark's final season at Iowa, women's college basketball finals drew over 18 million viewers, more than the NBA finals in some years. She single-handedly turned a niche sport into a cultural phenomenon. Her games were events. Her performances were legendary. Her trash talk was box office. And the WNBA knew it. They knew that Clark's arrival would mean more ticket sales, more merchandise revenue, more sponsorship dollars, and most importantly, more eyeballs on a league that desperately needed them. They had already started marketing her before she even declared for the draft. They had jersey designs ready. They had commercial spots planned. They had everything lined up. Except they forgot one thing. They forgot to treat her like the superstar she already was. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what actually happened. According to multiple sources close to the situation, and we've verified as much as we can, the WNBA's invitation was filled with caveats. It wasn't just a simple, "Welcome to the league, here's the red carpet." No, it was more like, "Welcome to the league, but here are the rules, here are the restrictions, here's what you can and can't say, here's how much we're willing to pay you, and oh by the way, you're going to have to earn your respect from the veterans who've been here longer." Now, that might sound reasonable to some people. After all, rookies have to pay their dues, right? Except we're not talking about just any rookie. We're talking about the most transformative player in the history of women's basketball. We're talking about someone who already has more cultural impact than half the league combined. And Clark, being the competitor she is, wasn't having it. She looked at that invitation, that carefully crafted, PR-polished, corporate-approved invitation, and she saw something else. She saw a league that wanted her fame but didn't want to give her power. She saw a league that wanted her ratings but didn't want to pay her what she's worth. She saw a league that wanted her face on posters but didn't want to let her speak her mind. So she said no. And that's when the internet exploded. Within hours, the news had spread across every major platform. SportsCenter led with it. ESPN dedicated a full segment. Twitter/X was flooded with reactions, memes, hot takes, and deep analyses. Even non-sports outlets like CNN, The New York Times, and BBC picked up the story. This wasn't just a sports story anymore, this was a cultural moment. But the real story, the one that the mainstream media is still trying to wrap their heads around, is what happened next. Because while the league was scrambling to control the narrative, something unexpected happened. The fans, millions of them, decided to speak up. And they didn't hold back. Let's be clear about something. Caitlin Clark has a fanbase that is unlike anything women's sports has ever seen. It's not just basketball fans. It's casual viewers. It's young girls. It's older men who never watched women's hoops before. It's international fans. It's people who found her on TikTok and fell in love with her swagger. These aren't just fans, they're advocates. And when they heard that Clark had rejected the WNBA's invitation, they didn't just get mad. They got organized. They started hashtags. They trended worldwide. They flooded the league's social media accounts with angry comments. They threatened to boycott games. They called for the commissioner's resignation. They did what fans do best when they feel their favorite player has been wronged, they fought back. And they weren't just fighting for Clark. They were fighting for respect. For fair treatment. For the idea that women's basketball is worth more than the crumbs it's been given. 3 million fans. That's the number that keeps coming up. 3 million people who engaged with the story in the first 48 hours. 3 million voices saying, "We're not going to let this slide." And that's when the real panic started. Before we go any deeper into this drama, we need to take a step back and understand exactly who Caitlin Clark is. Because if you don't get that, if you just see her as a basketball player, you're missing the bigger picture. Caitlin Clark was born in Des Moines, Iowa, in 2002. From a young age, she was obsessed with sports, basketball, soccer, softball, you name it. But basketball was different. Basketball was her language. It was her escape. It was the thing that made her feel most alive. Her father, Brent Clark, was a basketball player himself. He coached her. He pushed her. He instilled in her a competitive fire that would eventually become her trademark. And when we say competitive, we mean it. This is a woman who once cried after losing a board game as a kid, not because she was upset, but because she hated losing that much. But it's her mother, and Clark, who really shaped her perspective. And is the one who taught Caitlin about humility. About respecting others. About understanding that talent is nothing without hard work. She's also the one who made sure Caitlin stayed grounded, no matter how much success came her way. And success came early. In high school, Clark was a phenomenon. She averaged over 30 points per game. She led her team to state championships. She broke records that had stood for decades. College scouts from across the country lined up to recruit her. And when she finally chose Iowa, her home state school, the basketball world took notice. But here's the thing about Clark, she wasn't just about stats. She was about style. She played with a swagger that fans loved and opponents hated. She trash-talked with the best of them. She would stare down defenders after hitting impossible shots. She would wave goodbye to opposing crowds. She was unapologetic, bold, and fiercely confident. Some people hated her for it. They called her arrogant. They said she lacked humility. They complained that she didn't respect the game. But those criticisms, which we'll get into later, missed the point entirely. Because what Clark was doing wasn't just playing basketball. She was building a brand. She was creating moments. She was making people feel something. And isn't that what sports is all about? Let's look at her college career, because this is where the legend was truly built. At Iowa, Clark didn't just play, she dominated. She led the nation in scoring. She led the nation in assists. She had triple-doubles that left commentators speechless. She had games where she dropped 40 points, 15 rebounds, and 10 assists, numbers that look like video game stats but were very, very real. But what really made her stand out was her range. This woman could shoot from anywhere. Half court? No problem. Logo 3? Easy. Step back threes with a hand in her face? She'd do it and smile. She redefined what was possible in women's basketball. She made deep threes cool. She made flashy passes an art form. She made the game beautiful. And then there were the records. Because if you're talking about Caitlin Clark, you have to talk about records. She broke the NCAA women's all-time scoring record previously held by Kelsey Plum, a record that many thought would last for years. She surpassed 3,500 career points, 1,000 assists, and 800 rebounds. She became the first player in Division I history, men's or women's, to lead the nation in both points and assists. Think about that. Not just women's. Not just college. The entire Division I history. By the time her senior season ended, Clark had become more than a player, she was an icon. She was on magazine covers. She was doing commercials. She was being interviewed by Ellen, by Stephen Colbert, by everyone who wanted a piece of the hottest story in sports. But here's where it gets complicated. The more famous she became, the more the spotlight turned into a microscope. Every word she said was analyzed. Every expression she made was dissected. Every game was treated like a national event. And with that pressure came something else, criticism. Fans of opposing teams didn't just want to beat her, they wanted to see her lose. They wanted to see her humbled. They wanted to prove that her success was somehow undeserved. And when she won, which was often, they'd find something else to complain about. Her attitude. Her celebrations. Her perceived arrogance. And the WNBA? They saw all of this. They saw the hype, the ratings, the money. And they thought to themselves, we need to bring this woman to our league. We need her to bring her fans to our arenas. We need her to make us relevant. But they didn't consider one thing, her price. Not just financial. But emotional. Professional. Personal. Because Caitlin Clark isn't just a commodity, she's a person. A person with standards. A person with limits. A person who has been fighting for everything she's ever earned. And when the WNBA came knocking, the league that had dismissed players' pay concerns for years, the league that had forced its players to play overseas just to make a living, the league that often seemed more focused on virtue signaling than actually supporting its athletes, Clark saw through it. She knew that her arrival would be a cash cow for a league that hadn't done enough for the women who came before her. She knew she'd be asked to do more, give more, and be more, while being paid less than what she deserved. And so, when that invitation came, she didn't see an opportunity, she saw a trap. So she did what any self-respecting competitor would do. She said no. Now we get to the million-dollar question, literally. Why would Caitlin Clark, the biggest star in women's basketball, turn down an invitation to the very league she was destined to dominate? Why would she risk alienating fans, sponsors, and a sport that was ready to embrace her as its new face? The answer, as with most things in life, is complicated. First, let's talk about the money, because that's the elephant in the room. The WNBA's salary structure is notoriously low. The average player makes around $120,000 per year. The max salary is somewhere in the $250,000 range. And while that might sound like a lot to most people, especially when compared to regular jobs, it's a joke when you consider the revenue these players generate. Let's put it in perspective. In 2024, the WNBA's total revenue was estimated to be around $200 million. For comparison, the NBA generated over $10 billion in the same period. That's a 50x difference. And while the WNBA is growing, there's no denying that it's still nowhere near its male counterpart. But here's the thing, Caitlin Clark alone has been responsible for a huge chunk of that growth. Her college games brought in record-breaking viewership. Her merchandise sales were through the roof. Her presence created buzz that the WNBA could never manufacture on its own. She was literally worth more to the league than most of the players combined. So why wasn't she being offered more? Why wasn't the league breaking the bank to bring her in? Why were they trying to bring her in under the same old pay structure that has been criticized for years? Because, according to insiders, the WNBA didn't want to set a precedent. They didn't want to create a Caitlin Clark exception. They didn't want to admit that one player, one woman, was worth more than the rest of the league combined. They wanted to keep things fair, even if fair meant underpaying the most valuable asset they'd ever had. And Clark knew that. She's not naive. She's a student of the game, not just basketball, but the business of basketball. She has advisors, lawyers, and agents who've been negotiating on her behalf. And they've been telling her the same thing, you're worth more than they're offering. But the money is only part of the story. There's also the issue of respect. Because if you talk to people who know Clark, her coaches, her teammates, her family, they'll tell you that she's not just driven by money. She's driven by respect. She wants to be treated like the superstar she is. She wants her opinions to matter. She wants to be more than just a face on a poster. And from what we've heard, the WNBA wasn't offering that. They wanted her to be their star, but they didn't want to give her a voice. They wanted her to sell tickets, but they didn't want to let her speak her mind. They wanted her to elevate the league, but they didn't want to elevate her status. That's a bad deal. And Clark knew it. But there's a third piece to this puzzle, and this is the one that really makes this story fascinating. Clark, we've been told, is deeply aware of her responsibility. She knows that everything she does is being watched by millions of young girls who dream of being just like her. She knows that her decisions carry weight. She knows that if she accepts a bad deal, she's essentially telling those girls that it's okay to be undervalued. And that's something she can't do. So when she rejected that invitation, she wasn't just rejecting a contract. She was making a statement that women's basketball players deserve better. A statement that talent should be rewarded, not exploited. A statement that the fans who love this game deserve to see their heroes treated with dignity. Now, we can already hear the criticism. There are people who say she's being arrogant. There are people who say she's holding out for too much. There are people who say she should just be grateful for the opportunity. And we understand that perspective, we really do. Because in a world where so many people struggle for less, it can be hard to see someone turn down a life-changing opportunity. But here's the thing, Clark isn't just playing for herself. She's playing for the women who came before her, the ones who played in empty gyms for peanuts. She's playing for the women who will come after her, the ones who shouldn't have to fight for basic respect. That's why she said no. Not because she doesn't love basketball. Not because she doesn't want to play. But because she refuses to let the system win. She refuses to be just another player who gets used up and spit out. She refuses to accept less than she deserves. And in our opinion, that takes guts. Because saying no, when everyone is telling you to say yes, is the hardest thing in the world. It takes conviction. It takes self-belief. It takes a level of courage that most people never develop. And that's exactly why Caitlin Clark has millions of fans who'd follow her anywhere. If the WNBA thought they could sweep this under the rug, if they thought they could quietly handle Clark's rejection and move on, they had another thing coming. Because the fans? They weren't having it. We mentioned earlier that 3 million people engaged with this story in the first 48 hours. But that was just the beginning. As the news spread, the numbers grew. By the end of the first week, the conversation had reached over 10 million people across all platforms. And they weren't just talking, they were mobilizing. Let's break down exactly what happened. First, there was the Twitter/X firestorm. The hashtag Justice for Caitlin started trending within hours of the news breaking. Fans from all over the world, men, women, young, old, came together to voice their anger. They shared clips of Clark's best moments. They posted side-by-side comparisons of her stats versus WNBA veterans. They created memes that mocked the league's leadership. And it wasn't just fans of Clark. Even players from the WNBA, current and former, began weighing in. Some of them quietly supported her. Others were more vocal. A few even called out the league directly, saying that Clark's treatment was a symptom of a much larger problem. Then came the boycotts. Within days, fans had organized to cancel their WNBA subscriptions, to stop buying merchandise, and to avoid attending games. They called it a financial protest, a way to show the league that their most valuable resource, the fans, would not be taken for granted. And it worked. Ticket sales dipped. Merchandise revenue, already down because Clark wasn't signed, took an even bigger hit. Social media metrics for the league's official accounts crashed. Sponsors started calling, asking what the hell was going on. And the league? They scrambled. They released a statement, a carefully worded, corporate-approved statement, that tried to calm the waters. They said they respected Clark's decision. They said they were committed to having conversations with her representatives. They said they wanted to find a solution that works for everyone. But the fans weren't buying it. Because they'd heard this language before. They'd seen the WNBA make promises about pay equity that never materialized. They'd seen the league talk about growing the game while treating their players like second-class citizens. They'd seen the pattern, and they'd had enough. One fan wrote on Twitter, "We're not stupid. We know exactly what's going on. They want Caitlin to be their cash cow, but they don't want to pay her like one. We're not going to stand by and let that happen." Another wrote, "This is about more than basketball. This is about respect. And if the WNBA can't respect their biggest star, they don't deserve our support." And here's the thing, they were right. Because when you look at the history of the WNBA, you see a league that has consistently failed to advocate for its players. You see a league that has been happy to take the credit for women's progress but unwilling to invest in it. You see a league that talks a big game but falls short when it matters most. And Caitlin Clark, whether she intended to or not, has become the symbol of that fight. She's not just a player anymore. She's a symbol. She's the person who said no to a system that many believe is broken. She's the person who refused to be a pawn in someone else's game. She's the person who decided that being treated right is more important than being famous. And the fans? They recognize that. That's why they're still fighting. That's why the hashtags haven't stopped. That's why the pressure hasn't let up. Because they know that if Clark wins, if she gets the contract she deserves, if she sets a new precedent for the league, every player will benefit. Not just today, but for years to come. And if she loses? If she caves to the pressure and accepts a deal that undervalues her? Then the message is clear: women's basketball will never change. The old guard will win. And the next generation of players will be forced to make the same impossible choices. So the fans aren't going away. They're not going to let this story fade into the background. They're not going to let the league off the hook. They're going to keep fighting because they know what's at stake. And honestly, we're on their side. Now let's talk about what's happening inside the WNBA's headquarters, because trust us, it's chaos. Imagine this: you run a sports league. You've got a generational talent, someone who could change the course of your business. You've been planning for her arrival for months. You've got marketing campaigns in place. You've got commercial shoots booked.